I didn't hesitate as I stepped into the living room late that night. I had only risen to grab a glass of water, expecting the house to be silent. My husband, Victor, was away on a business trip, and Alex, my stepson, rarely emerged from his room before midday. So, seeing him seated on the couch caught me off guard. Not because he startled me, but because of the way he was looking at me. His gaze was locked onto mine, unwavering, and it took me a moment to understand why. That's when I noticed my nightgown. The fabric, so thin under the soft glow of the floor lamp beside him, clung to my figure, revealing far more than I intended. Alex, I finally managed to say, my voice quieter than I had intended. He didn't reply. His eyes roamed over me, and I felt a tension coil in my stomach. Not discomfort, but something far more perilous. Instinctively, I grasped the neckline of my gown, feeling exposed, but it was too late. The look in his eyes revealed everything. I turned quickly, muttering about needing water, but my hands shook as I filled the glass. His presence lingered, heavy and unspoken. When I glanced back, he was still watching, his expression unreadable, but intense enough to leave me breathless. That moment changed everything. I should probably explain how I ended up in this situation, where a single look from Alex could unravel me. My name is Margaret, a name that sounds far too dignified for the mess my life has become. I'm 53, married to Victor Hallworth, my second husband. He is a dependable man, but that dependability doesn't extend to our personal life. When I married him a decade ago, I thought I had found the stability I'd longed for after years as a single mother. My first husband had left me with little more than debt and heartache, and Victor offered the security I craved. But security isn't the same as love, and over time, our marriage has felt more like a business arrangement than a romance. Victor is often away for work, leaving me alone in an enormous house filled with expensive furniture, but devoid of warmth. I've tried to fill the void with hobbies, gardening, painting, but they've all felt hollow, as if I'm simply going through the motions. I've become invisible in my own home, a woman fading into the background, at least until Alex returned. He's 24 now, freshly graduated and home for the summer while he figures out his next steps. I've known him since he was a teenager, polite, reserved, and somewhat distant. But the Alex who came home this summer is different. He exudes confidence, and his sharp gaze hints at a maturity that wasn't there before. He's grown into himself, and for the first time, I can't help but notice. I tell myself it's a fleeting thought, harmless, but that night in the living room changed everything. As I lay in bed, replaying the scene in my mind, I couldn't ignore how his gaze lingered, or the tension in the air, or the way my body reacted, betraying emotions I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was just a momentary lapse, but deep down, I knew better. By the next morning, the memory of Alex's stare wasn't something I wanted to forget. It was something I wanted to experience again. From that day, I became hyper-aware of Alex's presence. The sound of his voice, the way he moved through the house, even the faint scent of his cologne seemed amplified. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into chores, scrubbing counters, reorganizing cabinets, but by dinner, I was unraveling. Victor was still away, leaving just Alex and me to endure an uncomfortable meal. I avoided looking at him, focusing on my plate as if the roasted chicken required all my attention. "You've been quiet today," Alex finally said, breaking the silence. Startled, I glanced up. His tone was casual, but the weight of his gaze was anything but. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. "You sure that's all it is?" he asked, his question hanging in the air, pointed and deliberate. Heat crept into my cheeks as I quickly looked away, pretending to refill my water glass. "About last night," he continued, his voice softer now. My hand froze mid-motion. "What about last night?" I asked. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I just wasn't expecting to see you like that." My pulse quickened. "Alex, it's fine. Let's just forget it." "Can you?" he asked, his voice low, almost challenging. I couldn't answer. Instead, I stood abruptly, gathering my plate. "I'm going to clean up." I heard his chair scrape against the floor as he stood and followed me into the kitchen. "Margaret," he said softly, closer now. I turned, clutching the plate as though it could shield me. "Alex, stop." He hesitated, his expression unreadable, then nodded. "Okay, I'll stop, for now." His words were quiet but certain, and they sent a shiver through me. The following days were a delicate balancing act. Alex didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. His presence was constant, hovering at the edges of my world. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. Alone in the house with Alex, the tension between us felt inescapable. "You okay?" he asked, stepping into the candlelit living room. "I'm fine," I replied, setting a candle on the coffee table. "You don't seem fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, sitting down across from him. "It's just the storm. It makes the house feel lonely." "You don't have to be lonely," he said softly, the words lingering in the air. My breath caught, but I forced a laugh. "You've been reading too many dramatic novels." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Margaret, we both know what this is." David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Smart move. Not rushing into anything," he said. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, analyzing the dynamics of our household with a precision that made my skin crawl. Later that night, I found Alex waiting for me in the garden, his silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. "He knows something," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. "David?" Alex asked, his tone calm. I nodded. "It's the way he looks at us. It's like he's piecing everything together." "Let him," Alex said, stepping closer. "He doesn't have anything solid." "But what if he finds something?" I asked, my voice trembling. We'll handle it, Alex replied, brushing his hand against my cheek. The next day, the situation took an unexpected turn. While sorting through a stack of mail in the study, I came across an envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message. I know what you've been doing. Meet me at the diner on 5th at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. My hands shook as I read and reread the note. There was no signature, but I didn't need one to know who had sent it. Something was wrong. Victor's voice startled me, and I quickly folded the note, slipping it into my pocket. Everything okay? He asked, glancing at me. Nothing, I said quickly, forcing a smile. That evening, I told Victor I was meeting a friend for coffee. He barely looked up from his laptop as I left, my heart racing as I headed to the diner. When I arrived, Sophie was already there, waiting in a corner booth. Her expression was smug as I slid into the seat across from her. "You've been busy," she said, stirring her coffee. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She leaned back, smiling. "Money. Enough to make me forget what I've seen." My fists clenched under the table. "You don't have proof, don't I?" she replied, pulling out her phone. She tapped the screen, and my blood ran cold at the sight of a grainy photo of Alex and me in the garden, his hand resting on my cheek. "Delete it," I said, my voice trembling. "Not until I get what I'm asking for," she said with a smirk. 50,000 by the end of the week. "I don't have that kind of money," I said, my mind racing. "Then figure it out," she said, standing and slipping her phone into her purse. "Because if you don't, Victor will be the first to see this." When I told Alex about the meeting, he was furious. "She's bluffing," he said, pacing the room. "She has photos," I said, my voice shaking. "And she's not bluffing, Alex. She's serious." "Then we'll pay her," he said firmly. "With what?" I asked, my desperation mounting. "I don't have access to that kind of money, and neither do you." His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "Then we'll find another way." Over the next few days, the tension in the house became unbearable. Victor remained oblivious, but David's presence loomed like a storm cloud. One afternoon, I overheard David and Victor talking in the study. "There's something off about Alex," David said. "If I were you, I'd keep an eye on him." "What are you getting at?" Victor asked, his tone wary. David hesitated. "Just a feeling. Call it professional intuition." That night, Alex came to my room, his expression grim. "We can't keep this up," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. "This house, this situation, it's too dangerous," he said. "We need to leave." "Leave?" I repeated, stunned. He nodded. "Just you and me. We can go somewhere far away. Start over." "Alex, that's insane," I said. "We can't just disappear." "What's insane is staying here, pretending everything's fine when it's not," he said, his voice rising. "I can't just walk away," I said, shaking my head as tears welled in my eyes. "From Victor, from this life. Do you love him? Alex interrupted sharply. I froze. That's what I thought, he said, his tone softening. Margaret, I love you, and I can't stand the thought of losing you. His words broke something inside me, and I pulled him into an embrace, clinging to him as though he were the only thing keeping me afloat. But even as I held him, a voice in the back of my mind warned me that this wasn't over. The storm was coming, and it would leave nothing untouched. The following morning, everything began unraveling faster than I could control. Alex's plea to leave replayed in my mind, but the thought of abandoning everything felt impossible. Victor remained oblivious, buried in his work, but David lingered in the background like a shadow. Sophie, meanwhile, became more demanding, her threats growing sharper. As I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, Victor walked in, looking sharp in a tailored navy suit. I'll be out most of the day, he said, scrolling through emails on his phone. What's going on? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. A meeting downtown, he replied, glancing up briefly. David's coming with me. Something about loose ends. The phrase sent a chill through me. What kind of loose ends? Nothing for you to worry about, Victor said with a shrug. Just business. As he kissed me on the cheek and left, a sense of foreboding settled over me. By mid-afternoon, my anxiety was spiraling. Alex was out, likely trying to deal with Sophie, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Sophie stood there, arms crossed, her expression smug. You're late, she said, stepping inside uninvited. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice shaking. The money, she said coolly. I told you I wanted it by today. I told you I don't have that kind of money, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Well, that's unfortunate, she said, pulling out her phone, because Victor might be very interested in seeing these. Once again, the photo of Alex and me filled the screen, leaving no room for doubt. Sophie, please, I said, my voice breaking. You don't have to do this. Oh, but I do, she said, her tone mocking. Unless you suddenly figure out how to pay up. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Alex walked in. He froze when he saw Sophie, his expression darkening. What's going on? He asked, his voice low and firm. Just a little chat with your stepmother, Sophie said, smirking. Alex stepped forward, his posture tense. You need to leave. Not until I get what I came for, she said, holding up her phone. Alex's gaze hardened. Before I could stop him, he snatched the phone from her hand. Hey, Sophie shouted, reaching for it, but Alex held it out of her reach. This ends now, he said coldly. You think that's my only copy? She sneered. Alex's eyes narrowed. If you so much as breathe a word of this, you'll regret it. For a moment, Sophie faltered, but her smirk quickly returned. Big talk, she said. Let's see if you can back it up. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She's not going to stop, I said, my voice shaking. She will, Alex said, his tone resolute. I'll make sure of it. Later that night, I found Alex pacing near the edge of the garden. His steps were deliberate, his posture tense. I hesitated before approaching, my voice trembling as I shared what I had overheard. Victor is planning something dangerous, I said. Alex's expression hardened, shadows deepening across his face. We have to stop him, he replied, his tone resolute. How? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. He holds all the cards, I whispered. The money, the connections. But he doesn't have you, Alex said, his voice unwavering. And that's what terrifies him. The next morning, everything escalated. I woke to the sound of raised voices coming from the study. Heart pounding, I crept closer, staying out of sight as Alex and Victor argued. Their words were muffled, but the tension was unmistakable. You're a selfish, reckless fool, Victor snapped. You've jeopardized everything I've built. And you're a liar and a coward, Alex fired back. You've been using Margaret to cover your crimes, and I won't let you drag her down with you. Victor's voice dropped, each word cold and calculated. And what will you do, Alex? Run to the authorities? They'll laugh you out of the station. You're just a spoiled child who doesn't know his place. Maybe not, Alex said, his voice steady, but I know enough to destroy you. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. I held my breath, bracing for what might happen next. Finally, Victor spoke, his tone eerily calm. If you want to destroy me, go ahead, he said. But know this, I'll take Margaret down with me. Everything she's worked for, everything she's built, will be gone. Do you really want that on your conscience? Before Alex could respond, I stepped into the room. My voice quivered as I said, Stop it, both of you. They turned to me, anger etched into their faces. This has gone too far, I said, my chest tight. Victor, if you care about me at all, you'll let this go. Victor laughed bitterly. Care about you? Don't fool yourself, Margaret. You're just another piece in the game. Alex took a step forward, his fists clenched, but I quickly moved between them. Enough, I cried. I won't let you destroy each other. Victor sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you can stop this? It's already too late. Later that evening, Alex and I made a choice. We have to leave, he said, his tone firm. It's the only option. I nodded, my heart sinking. But what about Victor? I asked. He'll come after us. Let him, Alex replied. We'll disappear. He won't be able to find us. We packed in haste, taking only the essentials. But as we were about to leave, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze us in place. Victor stepped out, his face twisted with fury as he strode toward us. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice cold and biting. Let us go, Victor, I said, my voice trembling. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You think you can just walk away? From this? From me? Alex stepped forward, his body taut with tension. We're done, Victor. You've lost. Victor's gaze flicked to me, his expression smug. You think he can protect you, Margaret? He's just a boy pretending to be a man. The moment things get hard, he'll abandon you. That's enough, Alex said, his voice steady. Victor sneered. You're nothing, Alex. And soon she'll see that. Before Victor could say another word, Alex grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the car. We're leaving, he said firmly. Victor didn't stop us. He stood there, his expression dark and triumphant, as though he believed he had already won. We drove for hours, the atmosphere in the car heavy with unspoken fears. No matter how far we went, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor wasn't finished with us. His shadow seemed to stretch endlessly, ready to pull us back into his grasp. When we finally stopped at a small motel on the outskirts of a quiet town, Alex turned to me, his face serious. We'll figure this out, he said softly. I nodded, though the weight of what we'd left behind pressed heavily on my chest. Despite the distance, I knew we weren't truly free. Not yet. Victor's threat lingered like a dark cloud over everything we tried to rebuild. That night, as Alex held me close, whispering promises of a future where we could be happy, I allowed myself to believe, if only for a moment, that escape was possible. The hum of the motel's air conditioner filled the silence as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded floral wallpaper. Alex stood by the window, glancing through the blinds every few minutes, as though expecting Victor to appear at any moment. We can't stay here forever, I said, breaking the stillness. I know, Alex replied, his voice strained. During the drive, he had been composed, resolute, but now I could see the cracks forming, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened whenever he looked outside. We need a plan, I said, trying to sound calm. Alex turned to me, his expression hard. The plan is to keep moving. Stay ahead of him. You really think Victor will let this go? I asked, standing to face him. He won't, Alex admitted, but let him come after us. Alex, I said, tears brimming in my eyes. We can't live like this forever. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice breaking. 3 days later, our breaking point came. While driving west toward a small town where Alex thought we could disappear, we noticed a car trailing us. It stayed just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but neither of us could shake the feeling that we were being followed. It's him, Alex said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he took the next exit, weaving through side streets to lose the car. But it stayed with us, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Hold on, Alex said, making a sharp turn onto a gravel road. The car behind us hesitated briefly before following, its tires kicking up dust as it closed the gap. Alex, what are you doing? I asked, panic rising in my chest. I'm ending this, he said, his voice firm. He brought the car to an abrupt stop, threw it into park, and stepped out. Stay here, he said, leaving no room for argument. I watched as he approached the other car, his shoulders squared. The driver's door opened, and Victor emerged, his face a mask of fury. You've got some nerve, Victor growled. This ends now. This ends now, Alex echoed, his tone unflinching. Victor laughed darkly. You think you can threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm not afraid of you, Alex said, stepping closer. You should be, Victor replied, pulling a gun from his coat. My breath caught as I scrambled out of the car. Victor, stop, I shouted, my voice shaking. This is your fault, Margaret, he snarled. You caused this mess. Put the gun down, I pleaded. Victor sneered. Why should I? You've already destroyed everything. Why not finish the job? Alex lunged, grabbing for the gun. A shot rang out, echoing across the empty road. Victor staggered, clutching his side as blood seeped through his shirt. Alex stood frozen, the gun now in his hands. I rushed to Victor, trying to stem the bleeding. Why? He whispered weakly. Why him? I couldn't answer. Alex dropped the gun, his face pale. We have to go, he said, his voice hollow. Tears streaming down my face. I nodded. We helped Victor to his car, but didn't stay to see what would happen next. We kept driving, heading toward an uncertain future. Though we hoped to escape, deep down, I knew it wasn't over.